It was Thanksgiving a few years ago, and my family gathered at my Uncle Ben's place in Central Florida. He lives out by a big quiet lake with only 5 other houses nearby. It's a rural area, not fancy by any means, but peaceful and spacious. My uncle's house sits on a lot of land, and he's what you might call a bit of a redneck. Whenever he hosts Thanksgiving, it feels more like a laid-back party than a traditional family gathering. There's always music blasting, coolers filled with beer, and cornhole set up in the yard. It's a fun twist on the holiday. We arrived at Uncle Ben's around 3 p.m. Throughout the afternoon, we snacked on chips and dip, played cornhole, and shot some hoops with my cousin until we were too full from beer and snacks to keep going. Time passed quickly as we laughed, played drinking games, and enjoyed each other's company. By the time 5:30 rolled around, Aunt Mel and Uncle Ben started setting up the Thanksgiving spread under a big gazebo they had in the yard, right by the lake. By the time the food was ready, the sun was setting. The gazebo was lit up with string lights, and we all sat down for dinner just as the sky turned dark. Uncle Ben is probably one of the few people who insists on having Thanksgiving dinner outdoors, but none of us mind. It's part of the experience at his place. As we were eating, something strange happened. My cousin suddenly pointed toward the tree line and asked, "Dad, who's that?" We all turned to look and saw a man standing at the edge of the woods, just watching us. Uncle Ben, always the no-nonsense type, stood up and called out, "Can I help you with something?" But before he could get close, the guy took off, disappearing into the woods. Laughing it off, Uncle Ben came back to the table and shrugged it off, saying, "Must be one of the local weirdos." Aunt Mel and I weren't so sure. It was unsettling. But Uncle Ben's carefree attitude convinced us to move on and enjoy the rest of the night. That was until I saw the same guy again, this time standing closer to the lake. I pointed it out, and now Uncle Ben was starting to get pissed. He stomped over toward the figure, yelling, "Hey, get the hell out of here!" But before he could get too close, the man ran off into the woods again. We thought it was over, but then another man appeared, this time on the opposite side of the yard, also standing at the tree line. Uncle Ben, my dad, and my cousin all got up to confront this guy too. But like the first one, he eventually ran into the woods before they could reach him. At this point, we'd had enough. It was clear that something was off, so we decided to start packing up the food and head inside. As we brought everything back into the house, Uncle Ben left the outside lights on, keeping an eye on things through the window. We all assumed it was just some teenagers or drunk locals trying to mess with us, but the fact that there were 2 of them, and that it was Thanksgiving, made it feel more malicious. A while later, I stepped outside to grab some more beers from the cooler under the gazebo. As I walked toward it, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was darker than before. The lights under the gazebo were now off. I quickly grabbed as many beers as I could and turned to go back inside. Just as I did, I heard the sound of a chair sliding across the concrete under the gazebo. I turned around and froze. There was a man standing there, tall, at least 6'5", slowly walking around the table as if he was inspecting it. My stomach dropped. I bolted back toward the house, yelling for Uncle Ben. He and my dad rushed outside, but before they could reach the gazebo, we heard loud banging coming from the side of the house, like someone was pounding on the siding. Now, even Uncle Ben was spooked. We hurried back inside, locked the door, and gathered in the living room. The tension in the room was thick. It was no longer just a couple of pranksters. Whoever these guys were, they were trying to scare us, and it was working. Not long after, we heard a loud bang on one of the windows, followed by the sound of glass shattering in the kitchen. Aunt Mel screamed for Uncle Ben to grab his rifle, but he cursed, saying it hadn't been loaded in years. Thankfully, just as things were escalating, we saw flashing lights from a police car pulling up. The officers searched the property, and while they didn't catch the trespassers, they did find a brick that had been thrown through the kitchen window. Attached to it was a note that read, "Leave now, you fucking filth." The next day, we discovered that Uncle Ben's Trump flag, which had been hanging outside, was missing. We all started to suspect that this wasn't just random trespassing. It was a politically motivated attack. It was unsettling, to say the least. None of us could think of any reason why someone would target Uncle Ben's house, especially on Thanksgiving. Whether it was because of the flag or something else, it was clear that these people had bad intentions. It's a stark reminder that even in the middle of nowhere, There are people out there willing to ruin what should be a peaceful holiday. It was Thanksgiving night, and like every year I was at my parents' house for dinner since they were hosting. The gathering was small, just family. Some cousins, uncles, and aunts I hadn't seen in almost a year. My parents cooked a massive meal, the usual Thanksgiving spread, and we all spent the day catching up and eating way too much. But before we even sat down for dinner, I got a long, rambling text from an unknown number. The message started with, "Hey Melissa, hope your Thanksgiving is going well." But the longer I read, the more uneasy I felt. I quickly realized who it was, Kevin, a guy I had never even met in person, but who had become increasingly obsessed with me after we matched on a dating app. He gave me creepy vibes from the start, and after a few casual conversations, I knew he wasn't someone I wanted to pursue anything with. When I politely told him I didn't think we had much in common and wasn't interested, he got weirdly aggressive and obsessive. It got so bad that he once blew up at me for posting a Snapchat story of me out with a friend, accusing me of being on a date with someone else. That's when I blocked him on everything: Snapchat, Instagram, and his phone number. But even after that, he found ways to reach out. Random Instagram accounts with 0 followers would try to follow me, and when I blocked them, new ones would pop up. On Snapchat, I'd get requests from accounts with different names, but every time I added one back out of curiosity, the snap score was always 0. It was clear he was creating fake profiles to get to me. Back to Thanksgiving night, after reading his text, which was full of gaslighting and passive-aggressive comments, I replied with, "If you keep contacting me, I will go to the police." I took a deep breath, trying not to let it ruin my night, and put my phone away to focus on dinner. My grandma, annoyed that I was on my phone at the table, told me to put it away, so I obliged and tried to enjoy the meal. But about 30 minutes later, my phone buzzed again with another long text from a different number. I didn't want to deal with it right then, so I ignored it, hoping to not let it get to me. When most of the family had left and things were winding down, I checked the message. This time it was much worse, longer, angrier, full of insults and threats. He was clearly escalating. I showed my mom, and she was horrified. She insisted that I go to the police the next day, which I planned to do. Later that night, I went back to my apartment. I lived on the lower floor of a 2-family house with my roommate Chelsea. She wasn't home yet, so I had the place to myself. I was ready to relax and forget about Kevin. I grabbed my laptop, found a Christmas movie, Surviving Christmas with James Gandolfini, and settled into bed. As the movie played, my phone rang with an unknown caller notification. I knew it was him. I declined the call, silenced my phone, and tried to focus on the movie. Halfway through, I heard footsteps outside my room. I assumed Chelsea had come home, but the footsteps stopped at my door, and then the handle started to turn. I always lock my bedroom door at night, so it didn't open. Still, I called out, "Chelsea?" but got no answer. The handle stopped turning, and I heard quiet footsteps walking away. I grabbed my phone and checked it. More texts from yet another unknown number. One of them read, "Good thing you made it obvious where you live." My heart sank. I called Chelsea 5 times, but she didn't answer. Panicked, I called my dad. Whispering, I told him I thought Kevin was in the house. My dad immediately said he was coming over, telling me to stay locked in my room. My parents live about 10 minutes away, but it felt like forever before he got there. The whole time I stayed on the phone with my dad. Eventually, Chelsea called me back, but to my horror, she said she wasn't coming home that night. That meant the footsteps I heard weren't hers. When my dad arrived, I unlocked the front door and let him in. He searched the apartment with me, and everything seemed fine until we got to the kitchen. The big sliding window was unlocked. My dad gave me a look and reminded me how important it was to lock all the windows, especially when I was home alone. It dawned on me that Kevin had probably used the window to get in. I spent the night at my parents' house, and the next morning we went to the county court's office to file for a restraining order. I ended up seeing Kevin in court to get the order extended, which was terrifying. Thankfully, the judge granted the extension based on the threatening texts. Even though I couldn't prove he had broken into my apartment, the messages were enough. Kevin has stayed away since then, but I still can't shake the feeling that he's out there, waiting for another opportunity. It's scary to think someone could become so obsessed, and I hope he hasn't found anyone else to harass like he did to me. It was a cold, rainy Thanksgiving, the kind of weather that makes you want to hunker down and stay inside. Our family isn't big, so our gatherings are always small and intimate. This year it was just my mom, my two sisters, Lauren and Emily, our grandparents, and me. My older sister Lauren had moved out a few years ago, but my younger sister Emily and I still lived at home with our mom. Our grandparents lived about 20 minutes away, so they always came over for the holiday. We didn't expect anyone else, especially not our dad. He and my mom hadn't spoken in years. We spent most of the afternoon preparing dinner. Our grandma was bringing over a few dishes too. As usual, we planned to sit down for Thanksgiving dinner at 6 o'clock sharp. When our grandparents arrived around 5, my sisters and I helped them inside, guiding them carefully up the slick, rain-soaked front steps. With everyone inside, the football game was turned on in the living room, and I sat with my grandpa to watch it. My grandpa is a huge Cowboys fan, and even though it was pouring outside, the warm, cozy atmosphere inside the house made for a peaceful evening. Lauren and Emily were busy in the kitchen with my mom, putting the finishing touches on dinner. As 6 o'clock rolled around, we all gathered at the dining table. The food was plentiful: turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, cornbread, potatoes, and more. After dinner, we moved back to the living room to watch the rest of the game, relaxing and enjoying the rainy evening. But then, the doorbell rang. It was still pouring outside, and no one else was supposed to be coming. My mom immediately assumed it might be our dad, which wasn't entirely out of the question, though he hadn't shown up to a family event in years. She asked me to go check who it was. I went to the door, calling out, "Who is it?" The sound of the rain pounding on the roof drowned out the response, so I opened the door, keeping the storm door locked. Standing outside in the downpour was a man, his raincoat hood pulled up to shield him from the weather. He stepped closer and shouted through the glass, asking for food. He claimed he was hungry, and even said something about how helping him would bring good karma. Feeling unsure, I told him to hold on for a second, and went back to the living room to tell my mom and grandma. My mom immediately said to close the door and not let him in, but my grandma, being the generous soul she is, suggested we give him some food. I agreed to put together a plate for him, figuring it was the least we could do on Thanksgiving. I grabbed a couple of paper plates, loaded them up with leftovers, and went back to the front door. I held up the plate to show him, but before I could unlock the storm door, he tried to open it himself. That set off alarm bells in my head. I yelled through the glass, "Hold on, it's locked!" But the fact that he tried to open the door on his own made me uneasy. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door. The second I did, he yanked it open and tried to force his way inside. I immediately pushed back, throwing the plate of food to the side and yelling for help. Lauren came running to help, and together, we managed to slam the door shut just as I saw 2 more men rushing toward the house from the street. We locked the door and ran to secure the back door too. Panic set in as the reality of the situation hit us. I was the only guy in the house, and I felt a huge responsibility to protect my family. Everyone was freaking out, unsure of what to do next. It didn't take long for us to decide to call the police. My mom made the call while I kept an eye out from the windows. The rain made it hard to see, but as I glanced out the back window, I saw 2 figures running through the yard toward the back door. Thankfully, it was locked, and after failing to get inside, they bolted through the yard and disappeared into the night. When the police arrived, the food I had thrown on the front porch was still there, untouched. Clearly, those guys weren't after food. They had something else in mind. We were shaken, but we knew we had narrowly avoided something much worse. That Thanksgiving could have turned into a complete nightmare if not for our quick reactions. My grandma's heart was in the right place, wanting to help someone in need. But it served as a harsh reminder that sometimes, trying to do the right thing can put you in danger. After that night, we installed a doorbell camera, and we've been much more cautious about opening the door to strangers. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed our stories and would like to hear more, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you captivating tales and new content every week. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We appreciate every one of you for being a part of our storytelling journey.